After Emily's mother, Laura, passed away, the entire world around their quiet Washington town seemed to lose its color. The house that once felt bright and warm now carried a stillness that pressed against every wall. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was the kind of heaviness that settled slowly, like dust on forgotten furniture. Emily, 22, and fresh out of college, had never imagined coming home under such circumstances. She thought she would return one day with stories about her first job or the exciting new people she'd meet. Instead, she came back to a home filled with half-finished reminders of her mother's life, her glasses on the nightstand, her scarves folded neatly in the hallway basket, and the faint smell of her favorite lavender lotion still in the air. Her father, Daniel, had always been a calm and steady man, the kind of person who carried responsibility without complaint. But now he moved through each room as if afraid he might break something simply by being there. He woke early but didn't do much. He drank coffee but barely tasted it. He tried to smile but his eyes stayed tired and distant. For weeks, he barely spoke beyond the necessary words. Yes, I'm fine, don't worry, go rest, and every time he said them, it sounded less like reassurance and more like someone trying not to drown. Emily felt helpless. She wasn't just grieving her mother. She was grieving the version of her father she remembered. She wished she could lift the sadness off him the way he used to lift her onto his shoulders when she was small. She tried cooking his favorite meals, playing old songs, opening the windows to let sunlight in, but nothing truly reached him. Every evening he sat alone on the back porch, staring out at the line of pine trees behind the house. It didn't matter if it was cold or windy, he went out anyway. As if the quiet night sky was the only place where he could breathe. For a while, Emily let him sit alone. She told herself he needed space. But each night he stayed out there longer, as though waiting for someone who would never return. She watched him from the kitchen window, twisting a dish towel in her hands, the ache in her chest tightening a little more with each passing day. She missed her mother with a depth she couldn't explain. But she was also terrified of losing her father in a different way, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. One evening, after a long day spent sorting through bills and old paperwork, she noticed him outside again. The sky was a deep blue, the kind that sinks into darkness gently. She watched him silently for a moment. His shoulders were hunched and his hands were clasped together as if he were holding on to something invisible. Emily walked outside before she could change her mind. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. She stepped onto the porch and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke at first. Only the wind moved. Finally, with a voice that trembled more than she wanted, she leaned slightly closer and whispered the words that had been sitting on her heart for weeks. "Dad, Mom wouldn't want you to disappear." The moment the words left her mouth, she wished she could take them back, not because they were wrong, but because she saw how deeply they hit him. His breath caught, and he closed his eyes as if bracing against a sudden gust of wind. He didn't reply, but something in him shifted. She felt it in the way he finally exhaled, long and slow, as though releasing something he had held too tightly. Emily didn't say anything more. She simply sat with him until the sky turned black and the porch light flickered on. They stayed in silence, but it felt different, less like two people lost in separate sadnesses, and more like a shared beginning. The next morning, she noticed 2 cups of coffee on the counter instead of 1. Small, simple, but enough to tell her that her whisper had reached him in a place words rarely do. He even asked her how she slept, something he hadn't done since the funeral. It wasn't cheerful, but it was human, and that itself felt like hope. Over the next few days, little changes continued. He stepped outside during the mornings instead of locking himself inside all day. He took a short walk around the neighborhood. He even let Emily convince him to visit the grocery store, where an older woman from church hugged him gently and told him she was praying for him. Normally, those moments would overwhelm him, but this time he simply nodded and thanked her. One afternoon, while Emily was organizing old boxes in the living room, she heard him say her name from the hallway. His voice was soft but steadier than it had been in a long time. He held an old photo album in his hands, the one containing pictures from their family vacations. holidays, and her parents' early years together. He swallowed hard before handing it to her. "I think I'm ready to look at these again," he said. So they sat on the couch, shoulders touching, flipping through pages filled with smiles, sunlit beaches, and silly moments. They laughed a few times. They cried a few times. It hurt, but it also healed. Emily realized then that grief doesn't go away, but it becomes something you can hold without breaking. Later that week, Daniel visited the small independent bookstore downtown. It had been his wife's favorite place, the kind of cozy shop with handwritten notes attached to recommended books and the smell of fresh paper floating through the air. Emily didn't go with him. He said he wanted to do it alone. She agreed, knowing it was another step forward. Inside the bookstore, he walked slowly, touching the spines of books, as if greeting old friends. He paused in front of the poetry section where his wife used to spend hours. That was when someone approached him, not abruptly, not intrusively, but with a gentle presence that made him turn his head. Her name was Claire. She was in her late 30s, with soft blonde hair pulled into a loose bun and warm hazel eyes that held the kind of kindness people earn by surviving their own storms. She wore a simple cardigan and held a stack of books in her arms, but the thing that struck Daniel most was her expression. It wasn't pity. It wasn't forced cheer. It was understanding. She noticed the book in his hand, a poetry collection. His wife had loved and smiled softly. "That's a beautiful choice," she said. Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond. His throat tightened a little, but not painfully. "It was my wife's favorite," he managed to say. Claire's expression softened. "I'm really sorry for your loss." Her voice didn't feel heavy or awkward. It felt sincere. For the first time in months, he found himself speaking a little more, not everything, but enough. He told her how his wife used to mark her favorite pages, how she'd read poems out loud during rainy evenings. Claire listened without interrupting, and that alone made him feel a calm he hadn't felt in a long time. She introduced herself as a literature professor from Seattle, visiting family for the summer. She wasn't trying to comfort him. She was simply being present. That made all the difference. They spoke only for a few minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, nothing resembling anything beyond a simple human conversation. But when he left the bookstore with his new book, he realized something surprising. He didn't feel guilty. For months, he had been terrified that any moment he smiled, any moment he spoke to someone new, any moment he reached for something beyond grief, it would feel like a betrayal. But standing there on that warm summer sidewalk, book tucked under his arm, he felt something different. A very small, very quiet sense of permission. That evening, Emily noticed he came home a little lighter. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She simply saw the difference. Later that night, while sitting on the porch again, Daniel looked up at the sky with a steadiness he hadn't shown in months. He still hurt. Of course he did, but something inside him had begun to thaw. Like winter slowly giving way to spring, and Emily, watching from inside the house, realized something important. Maybe her whisper had not just been a plea for him to stay present. Maybe it had been the key that opened a door he didn't know he could walk through. She wondered if her mother would be proud of them both. Because for the first time, since everything fell apart, life wasn't frozen anymore. It was beginning to move again. And that was how everything began to change. The summer days stretched long and golden. For the first time since her mother's death, Emily noticed warmth returning to the house. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was small things. Daniel humming quietly while washing dishes, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, and the faint sound of laughter echoing from the kitchen when she joked about something trivial. Emily felt a cautious hope she hadn't experienced in months. Grief still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer ruled every corner. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel suggested they all go to a book reading at a small cafe by the river. Claire, the literature professor he had met weeks before, had invited them. Emily hesitated, unsure if she was ready to watch her father interact with someone new. But something in his calm encouragement made her agree. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the quiet wish to see him happy again. The cafe was cozy and smelled of coffee and baked pastries. Soft jazz played in the background. People chatted quietly at small tables, their mugs steaming in their hands. Claire was already there, standing near the stage with a warm smile that immediately made Daniel relax. He had spent weeks thinking about her. But he hadn't expected her presence to feel so natural, so easy. When she saw them, she waved. "I'm so glad you came," she said. Daniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Emily, watching from behind him, realized he wasn't tense. He wasn't anxious or fearful. He was simply present. That alone felt miraculous after months of silent sorrow. The author began speaking, reading passages from a new novel about love, loss, and second chances. The words hung in the air, and Emily found herself drawn into the story. Daniel listened quietly beside her, occasionally nodding, but mostly just absorbing the moment. Claire's soft presence nearby gave him permission to breathe again without guilt. After the reading, Claire came over to talk. "Thank you both for coming. I know it's not easy," she said gently. Daniel nodded. "No, it really isn't. But it's good. I needed this." Emily could see the relief in his posture, the way he finally allowed himself to exhale. Claire smiled warmly. Grief is love that doesn't have a place to go, but sometimes it finds a path forward when we're ready. The drive home was quiet, the kind of comfortable silence that feels like it holds unspoken understanding. Emily glanced at her father and noticed something she hadn't in months, the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It wasn't the fake smile he used to give out of habit. It was genuine. Over the following weeks, life began to shift in subtle ways. Daniel invited Claire to join them for dinner one evening. Emily watched as her father spoke with a lightness she hadn't seen in months. He shared stories of his wife, and Claire listened with patience and warmth. No one was trying to replace anyone. They were simply connecting carefully and respectfully. Emily felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. She wasn't jealous or threatened by Claire's presence. She was just surprised to see her father opening his heart again. It made her wonder how much her whispered words after her mother's death had really changed things. Could she have sparked this slow, gentle healing? One evening, Daniel asked Emily to join him on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft oranges and purples. Fireflies danced in the yard. Emily leaned against the railing, letting the cool breeze brush past her. Daniel said softly, "Do you remember what you whispered that night after your mother passed?" Emily nodded. "I do." Daniel took a deep breath. "I think. That saved me. You saved me." His voice cracked slightly, and Emily felt a lump in her throat. "No, Dad," she whispered, leaning closer. "It wasn't just me. Mom's love never ended. It just changed shape. It's still with us, guiding us." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I can feel it. Every day." From that evening on, small joys returned to the household. They took walks along the river, laughing quietly about memories they shared with Laura. Daniel started cooking again, sometimes experimenting with new recipes that reminded him of his wife's adventurous spirit. Emily discovered herself smiling more often, even laughing at times when her father told old jokes. The home felt lighter, more alive, as if grief had loosened its grip just enough for life to slip back in. Claire became a steady presence in their lives. She wasn't intrusive. She didn't rush anything. She simply shared quiet conversations over coffee, recommended books, and sometimes walked with them by the river. Emily noticed how natural their interactions had become. Her father laughed with her openly. Kay and Claire's presence never felt like a threat to memories, or Lovett felt like a bridge to the future. One afternoon, while the three of them sat on the porch together, Emily asked her father about the bookstore meeting. Daniel's eyes softened. "She didn't try to fix me," he said. "She just listened. Sometimes that's all you need." Emily smiled. "I think she helped you find a little hope." "Yes," he admitted, "and maybe I was ready to find it." He looked at the sky as the sun dipped behind the pines. Fireflies blinking like tiny stars in the twilight. "It's strange. For months, I thought life would never feel like life again. But now, I think I can move forward without forgetting." Emily leaned against his shoulder. That's all we can ask for, Dad. To keep living even when it's hard. The summer continued with quiet routines and gentle discoveries. Daniel and Claire went on small walks together. Emily spent afternoons in her room, reading or writing, finally finding peace in the stillness. The house was filled with warmth again, but not the same warmth as before. This was a different kind of warmth. Born from healing and acceptance, then came a small, unexpected moment that Emily would never forget. One evening, Daniel invited Claire to stay for dinner. Afterward, they all sat on the porch watching the fireflies flicker across the yard. Claire smiled at Daniel, and he smiled back, a real smile. Unguarded and full of quiet joy. "Emily," he said, turning to her, "I never thought I'd feel this way again. But I do, and it's okay. Mom would want me to live, and I want to." Emily felt a rush of emotion. She realized that healing doesn't erase the past. It simply allows space for new memories to grow alongside the old ones. Her mother's love remained in every corner of the house, in every laugh, in every quiet glance exchanged between father and daughter. And now it could coexist with something new: friendship, hope, and maybe even love in a different form. As the sun set behind the pines, casting long shadows across the yard, Emily looked at her father and Claire. They were talking softly, sharing a private joke, and she realized that life could feel light again. Not because grief was gone, but because they had found ways to carry it without letting it consume them that night. Emily sat in her room thinking about everything that had happened since her mother's passing. She felt a quiet pride in herself and her father. She had whispered words that seemed small at the time, but they had set something in motion. Something that allowed her father to breathe again, to open his heart without guilt, and to discover that joy could still exist even after heartbreak. Weeks later, the family began new traditions. Sunday mornings became pancake breakfasts with laughter echoing through the kitchen. Afternoon walks by the river became shared adventures with Claire joining them. Emily found herself sharing stories about her mother, her father, and their lives together in ways that felt both bittersweet and comforting. They weren't trying to replace what they had lost. They were simply learning how to live alongside it. Then came the night when Daniel stood on the porch alone, looking at the fireflies blinking like tiny candles in the dark. Emily joined him silently, leaning against his shoulder. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Life isn't the same without her," he said, "but it's still beautiful. It's still ours." Emily nodded. "And we'll keep making it ours, together." The stars above blinked faintly, as if agreeing. The house no longer felt empty or heavy. It felt alive, full of love, memories, and the quiet hope that life could still surprise them, even after heartbreak. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Emily, Daniel, and even Claire felt a sense of completeness, not in the way of forgetting, not in the way of replacing love lost, but in the way of opening hearts to what the future could hold. Because sometimes healing begins with a simple whisper. Sometimes love finds its way back into life slowly, gently, and unexpectedly. And sometimes the smallest moments shared laughter, quiet walks. A smile become the most important parts of living again.